Um, got it. This event is being hosted by the GDSC McMasterU outreach team, which consists of Punya, myself, Amina, Jacob, and Harmanpreet.
Today, we have a panel of 5 speakers who will be reviewing 5 resumes together.
We'll begin with a short introduction from each of the speakers with their names, their education, and previous co-op or work experience. We can start in clockwise orders with the name presented within the screen. So Mitchell, can you please share a bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Mitchell. I graduated in 2020. I studied engineering, physics, and management while I was at McMaster. Currently working at a machine learning startup called Cohere, where they train large language models to do natural language processing and provide access to these large models through an API. So these models can help you do autocomplete that you'd see when you're texting or in Gmail, for example, or powers things such as Google search. What I'm doing currently in terms of internships, I kind of did a lot of exploration, started more on the technical side, went to the business side, but did some consulting at Deloitte. I did a term at Shopify as a data scientist, and then also worked as data analyst for marketing data at Tangerine. But that's just a few of the things that I did. I'll pass it off to Disha.
Hello, everybody. I'm Disha Thakur, and I did my bachelor's back from my nation, that is India, in information and technology. And right now I'm pursuing my master's in Mac in system and technology. I am right now working as an intern in SODI as quality assurance specialist. And back, I worked as a Python developer as well for like good 6 months. I had some of the projects as well, done my certifications from Coursera, Google, Kaggle, etc. And most prominently, I'm looking for my more internships as a QA as well. So right now I'm working in SODI, which is a product-based company. And yeah, looking forward for my full-time as well.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kylan. I'm in my 3rd year of Tron and I Bio at McMaster right now. If you're part of the GDSC, you may know me from the club. I'm the president right now, but I'm super excited to be on this panel hosted by the outreach team. A bit about my co-op experience. Last summer, I worked as an Explore intern at Microsoft, doing a mix of PM work and SWE work. I was on the Microsoft advertising team, so creating a feature for the Microsoft Ads editor. And then the summer before that, I was a research assistant doing computational medical imaging with the prof at McMaster.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ishita, and I am a 4th year computer engineering student. I am currently on an internship, so I'm not taking school full time, but I am on a 12-month internship at AMD. I am also one of the club vice presidents here at GDSC. So you might have seen me around, you might have seen messages from me, but I'm excited that all of you are here today. In the past, I've also done 2 other internships. I've done a robotics internship, and then I've done a software development internship at a startup last year. And more recently, I'm working at AMD as a software program manager. So it's a little bit of PM work and mainly overseeing the products and the development of some of the cloud gaming technologies that AMD is involved with. Yeah, so super excited to be here and present.
Awesome. Bilal, can you share a bit about yourself?
Yep. Hey everyone, I'm Bilal. Currently a software engineering and management student in my 5th year. In terms of my experience, I've had 3 internships in the past. First one was a startup, Post Life Savings at at the Forge startup incubator that we have in McMaster. Second one was at Loadlink Technologies, where I was a web developer intern. And most recently, I was in RBC as a developer intern and working on some IT management tools with call service now. So yeah, that's just a little bit about my experience.
Thank you, Bilal, and thank you so much to the panelists for their intros. We'll now begin with the first resume. Each resume will be critiqued by all panelists, and they will each provide 1 to 2 points of feedback. The panelists can go in the same order as their intros.
And just to confirm, are we trying to read the resumes in view of applying for SWE roles or developer roles in general?
General technical roles and just general feedback on the resumes as they're created.
Sure. Okay. So I'll just say at the beginning, everyone reviews resumes a little differently and different information will stand out. I think in general, the layout of this resume reads pretty well. I'd say this is very typical layout for a SWE resume. It's helpful to have the programming language and libraries at the top. Basically, when I first look at a resume, I'm doing a quick check of are the core skills and competencies there, and then dive deeper into the actual work that they did at certain companies. I personally don't worry too much about the company name or what the formal title was. I look more at the actual bullet points and what is the work actually completed, what soft skills, what technical skills did they learn. So if you can include more, as much detail as you can that's relevant to the new role, that's helpful. But generally, I'd say this resume reads well. I can see that they started school in 2022. That's why there's no bullet points under education. But as you get more advanced in your schooling, ideally, you have 1 or 2 points about some accomplishment you've had at school. But for someone who just started in 2022, I think the technical experience outlined seems relevant for technical roles. And there's a good amount of detail and it's easy to read.
Thank you. Do any other panelists have any points?
So, yes, I had a look with this resume before as well. So what I think is every resume should start with the key points. That's the most important thing because that's what the employer will see the zest, what the zest of this resume is, what kind of skills that one had. Before diving into the more resume, he'll first see the key points. So I'll strongly recommend that everybody to add the key points at the starting of their resume, because that's where the employer will get to know whether to look for this in resume or not, because that's where he'll get the idea. So I'll recommend to add as already mentioned, the accomplishments, the certifications that one did or not, but that's an optional, but strongly add the key points at the starting of the resumes.
Any other panelists?
Yeah, I can jump in if I may. I really like the format of the resume. Actually, it's very similar to the format I use. So definitely slightly more typical, but sort of the standard resume format that you'll see go around. It's also very ATS friendly and parsable. So a lot of companies, when they filter out resumes, it ends up being that your format might not always pass through the resume filters, but this format seems to usually work, and it's very clean and simple. It's easy to look at, so definitely a plus point on there. If I were to suggest a few things, they do mention in the education that they have a scholarship. I would personally bold that and maybe even add a few description pieces in there. Since they're a first-year student, they probably don't have a lot of coursework or relevant projects from university just to talk about. But if they do have an Excellence Award scholarship, then maybe bolding that would be first choice I would make, and just highlighting what exactly they were awarded for, because that in itself will stand out to the employer that they're a first-year student and they're already sort of at the top of scholarship and all of the involvements over there. The other thing I did notice is try to have experiences in chronological order. So I see the first experience they've listed is October 2019, and then they go into July 2021, and then they go again to September 2019. There's a few different ways you can organize it chronologically, like you can align the start date to be most recent or least recent. Typically what I've seen with successful resumes or something that really catches eye is your most recent experience is at the top, simply because that's what the employer is very, very bound to see at the very beginning. So putting your July 2021 experience, the second experience that they've mentioned, on the very top would be ideal in a way, because it's what the employer is probably going to find most recent, most relevant to the work. And then last thing I will point out is obviously using numbers and metrics. So I've seen they've used a few numbers, and I've tried to bold it, but move them towards the front of the bullet points so that, you know, it immediately stands out. And then same thing with projects. They've bolded a lot of words, which is really nice, and it looks really clean to look at. So keeping the same format in mind and like bolding stuff within the experience a little bit more, using more numbers, is definitely going to be useful, because people want to see how you can quantify metrics and what impact did you bring to the team.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add from the panel?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree with what other people have said. I think like something to other people can also learn from it is like the bolding is very helpful, because it like draws your eyes to specific points, and as well as Shita mentioned, like the stats also help quantify on what you've done. That way it's more easy to be like to figure out, like to sort of make your way through the weeds and figure out like what the actual impact was. So that was nice.
And I'll just add a little bit more to what everyone said. So just one thing I noticed was to just add some more details to the award that you got, just so people it gets put into perspective for the recruiters and such. And then in terms of your experience, oh, sorry, yeah. So in terms of your experience, you can just mention like what institution you were part of. So I can see that you're like, for the last experience you have there, you said energy, martial arts. You can have something like that for the other two, because FRC robotics, you can say like part of like which school you were and things like that. And for your for the next one that you have, like the tutor one, you can put like a company name, or just say like a small business of your own, something like that, to just make it very consistent. And then in terms of your projects, you know, I'm assuming the code underscore there is the hyperlink to the project. So you can put the whole link to your GitHub repository right there. And then when someone prints it out, they can also go and check those projects out very easily from that. And lastly, just in terms of your technical skills and such, I would say that the tools and platforms that you have a lot of like different focuses there. So there's some like graphic design one, and then there's some pure developer ones and things like that, and some just general design ones like Autodesk Inventor. So maybe reduce that a little bit, just so the recruiter knows what you're focused on and what you're really good at, because a lot of skills just to them shows that there's a sort of lack of mastery there. But yeah, that's just a little bit from me.
Thank you so much, panelists. We'll now move on to the second resume.
Can I quickly add one last point based off
Oh, yeah.
what everyone shared? I think in general, the formatting and the content of the base resume will take you like 60–70% of the way. And the last bit you'll make up by tailoring it to the job and including the keywords that are included in the job description. I think it's always important, especially if you have like a non-technical person screening your resume, like the keywords are really helpful. So I think that would give you a good boost when you're applying to a specific role.
Great point. Thank you so much. So I guess we'll move on to the second resume. I guess the panelists, you can take the floor.
Sure. So I think someone already mentioned ATS parsing. Let me drop a quick link in the chat if you want to. I'll make sure this sends to everyone. If you want to make sure that your basically what kind of contents is pulled out of your resume by an automated system, you can try and run it through this website and get a sense of like a general score of how parsable it is in some sense. But there's a lot of information that might be lost in this resume based off of putting the circle graphics on the left side and just how the layout is in general. So that's like the first point about the formatting. Like, I'm generally okay with the skills being outlined like that. Like at some point I did it like that too. So like I understand it's more appealing to look at for a person, but different companies have different systems. Some people will go through it all manually, but a lot of companies will use some kind of automated software. So you just have to know how those handle your resume. And generally, I would expect that most of your key skills, if you're listing them, are in the higher, like the 80th percentile of whatever metric you put on there. So I don't think the bubbles are totally necessary, but that's a bit of a nitpick. I would honestly, similar to the last resume, just list out the key skills, and then if they're listed, people will assume you have confidence speaking to those skills. Very similarly to the education bit, I think I would want to see a little more detail on this education in particular, especially being a year in to your education, like some sort of project or accomplishment, like showing that in that short period of time within a year, like you've been able to produce something you're proud of, ideally. If there isn't, then there just isn't, and you lean more on your other projects or other experiences, and that's okay. The resume objective or summary sections in general can be helpful. I find that typically when they're 1 line or 2 lines contained in a single paragraph, like I'll scan through it quickly. However, when it's broken up, I'm less likely to go through the whole thing and will jump mostly to the experience and look at what you've done in the past. So if you have an objective or a summary section, keep it to 2 sentences and just be like the most pertinent points to the job you're applying to. I think that's what I would share generally. And then there is some information about technical competency, but I think that you might benefit from adding a little more detail to some of your bullet points there. I would say they're generally a little short and give the high level concept, but there's room for quantifying a bit, like how many students did you teach, for example, or like what was your success rate in being able to help students pass a certain course while you were a tutor. That kind of quantification is helpful and helps you stand out. So that's what I'll share at first. I'm sure there's other points that people will share.
Do any other panelists have any points?
Yeah, just adding on to Mitchell's point about making the bullet points a bit more descriptive. I think some of the, it could help whoever's reviewing the resume to get a bit more insight into like some of the descriptions that you do have currently. For example, I think you mentioned you're like the McMaster FYC residence chair, and in that you said got input from first years and implemented changes based on their feedback. I think I'd be like curious to know like what kind of changes did you implement, and maybe like strategies used to implement those changes, because that could show like depending on like what kind of changes and what kind of initiatives you ran, it could just show leadership. It could show taking the initiative, but it's sort of hard to gauge that when you don't have a sense of what kind of initiatives you did take. It's kind of like more of a broad statement right now. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is I noticed you included your Facebook, and I would say unless your Facebook is like super professional or you relate it to work or anything, I probably would not include that, and I'd include like your LinkedIn instead.
Totally agreed with Kylan on that. Try and include a LinkedIn if you have one. And the other thing that she also mentioned is talking about your experience in a way that demonstrates impact. So how did you do something that, people would look at it and say, oh, this is interesting, or they want to learn something more about it, giving them sort of something to think about or something to say, oh, this is something different that I have not seen before. You always want to be thinking about impact because recruiters want to see you as a person. Everyone sort of brings something different to the team. So how are you bringing something different, and how has your impact, how has the work you've done made that impact in whatever role you were in? So the FYIC residence chair is a good example of that. It's a certainly big commitment, and I would assume that there's something really cool that came out of that experience, something really exciting that you took away from that. So talking about what you took away, how the impact you made, how many students were involved, how successful the event was, how many, I guess, panelists, speakers, chairs, how many people were involved in the planning of that, how many people did you manage, all of that sort of comes together, and it really demonstrates your level of expertise and your experience and just what you took away from that experience. And then I think Michelle also mentioned this earlier. The resume objective is good when it's a little bit shorter, and it also takes up a lot of space on your resume. So hypothetically, you could have moved a lot of it up a little bit more, since you do have a little bit of space between the resume objective and your experiences over there. So having a little bit more space in that section could be used potentially to go into more depth about your extracurricular experiences that you've listed over there, and quantifying again as much as possible. One other thing I will pick on is the qualification section is at the very bottom. So usually you want to have anything that sets you apart from the group a little bit higher. So I would probably move qualifications above key skills, and maybe even make key skills sort of not that bubble format, but bolded and standing out on them by themselves independently, because again, those would probably not pass through the ATS resume parser that most companies use. So yeah, just moving those qualifications up, reducing the key skills down to just the bullet points and bolding all of them, and finally, just going into a little bit more description with your extracurricular experiences and talking about the impact really.
Any other panelists?
Yep. So yeah, I'll just add on a little bit to what everyone's saying. So details are good, and maybe even like reduce the jot notes that you have there, and then add more details for the ones that you have there, because you want to communicate as much impact as possible. In terms of, let's say you would be using this job for applying for like a software engineering position, right? Usually those don't require objective statements, but as everyone else said, yeah, just try to make that shorter. And in terms of your qualifications right there, I would also say to just add some details there to just put it into perspective, because these are some pretty good achievements. And if whoever's reading the resume does not know about the award that you're receiving, they wouldn't really know how good it is. So make sure to add some points there. And in terms of the key skills that you have there, I would say you can keep them there, but maybe reference them back in your experience and say like how you have improved all of these. Because what I've heard from a lot of recruiters is that they find it hard to like put it, like reference it in their mind of how good or bad this is. Like if you say 5 out of 5, are you like perfect, like absolutely perfect at this? What's the evidence for it, and things like that, right? So just make sure to relate it to somewhere else in your resume to just make it a little bit more like concrete. Yeah, but that's it from me.
Thank you. Did anyone want to add anything? Thank you all. So we'll move on to the third resume. Here it is.
Pull it up. Okay. This person has a lot of education, which is great to see. I think at a top level, for a human with the amount of bolding, it's a little hard to read through. Generally, I would say the actual education and the name of the institution, you don't necessarily have to bold. You can leave bolding to the key skills that you want to show and emphasize for the role you're applying to. Like, I understand the bolding here could be stylistic, but yeah, I'm not sure if that's what you're trying to emphasize, or if there's something else. I do like, however, how you included like at least one bullet point on each of your educational pieces that you wanted to highlight. I do not have much familiarity with what you're talking about in the first bullet point, like the Drossel framework, but could be very relevant for the role. So I think that's good. I think the technical skills portion, you can move to the top even, just because it doesn't take a lot of headroom and it'll help check off a lot of mental boxes right at the beginning. So you can move that even before education. And then for the professional experience, yeah, I think it would be generally okay for the ATS, but I think I'll come back to the formatting. It's just hard to find the section breaks. I understand it's like all capitalized professional experience, but with the amount of bolding, it just all blends together. And if for a certain role, there could be generally so many resumes that honestly, if it's like too much of a mental burden for someone to figure out your resume, like it's easy for it to get passed up. That's just the fact of the matter, which is unfortunate sometimes. So the easier you can make it for the recruiter, like really make it obvious what you're trying to highlight and make it easy to read, I think that will take you a long way. Other than that, I might have to read into some details or understand the actual job you're applying for to know if the bullet points are the most relevant. So I'll pass it off to someone else for now.
I can add that the resume they try to make it more precise as much as they can. And I also agree with him that technical skills should be taken above the education. And here what I wanted to add is try to add all the technical skills either in your certification, can relate to your certification or your projects, anything, so that the recruiter can have a confidence that the applicant has the more, the good technical skills to believe on. Because if some of the skills are left and not included in any of the projects or anything, that's going to give you a big hurdle in your interviews. So try to add all those skills either in your project, accommodate in your projects or certifications, and try to add more accomplishments that you have or not. It's an optional, but try to add those. Even if a smaller, you can add it. And one more thing, try to add your GitHub link at the top, so that it's more important. It's again, it's an optional, but it's highly recommended that you should add it at above. That's all from my side.
I'm going to add a few more points here. So I completely agree with what the previous panelists have just mentioned, making sure that you don't overuse the bold feature. It's supposed to be something that draws attention to a specific section in your resume. So when you bold everything, it sort of makes it hard to read through. If a human is looking at it, it's kind of distracting in a little bit. So for example, you don't need to necessarily bold the company name or the time period that you worked with. You can leave those unbolded and then really just bold the actual title itself. In terms of the titles, I will say in your professional experience, you've mentioned, so with your title, you've put a break there and then you've sort of mentioned your skills that you used. It is usually a good practice. I will say that personally might be a little overdone, simply because you have the technical skills section like right above it in your resume that sort of talks about all of the programming skills and stuff that you've already mentioned. So repeating them again in your actual title of the job description might not be necessary. It also saves you a little bit space, so it looks less cluttered. And then to add on to that, the technical skills section, obviously moving it up a little bit more because it doesn't take a lot of space for you. But what I did notice is you've on the same line mentioned programming languages and frameworks/tools. Now, if I'm looking at it on a glance, I might miss the second half of the skills that you've mentioned. So I might just see the programming languages and I might just see the web dev if I'm taking a quick 5-second look. So what you can do in that case is make 2 distinct columns and list out your programming languages and web dev distinctly on the left side, and then the frameworks, tools, and database on the right side. Or you could just put it all one column, but one below the other. Putting it on the same line can make it so that the recruiter misses it, or they just don't see it because they're taking a quick look at it. Other than that, I agree with sort of everything else that the previous panelists have mentioned. So using sort of more numbers, pulling on some more data. For example, you've mentioned you've worked at ArcelorMittal. That is a pretty well-known company. So talking about the impact, I don't see many numbers there. I see that you've mentioned you had experience with full-stack development, agile software development, stuff like that, but using numbers to quantify all of those. And specifically the third bullet point within that first experience I'm looking at, you mentioned exposed to Azure DevOps. I wouldn't start personally a statement with exposed to. You should probably use something like have experience with, or an action verb that shows that you were able to take that skill and use it in your work, and how that skill that you picked up at work made an impact to the project you were working on. So really just a few of those things. And then finally, within your project section, I like the fact that you've gone ahead and listed the skills and the description of the projects themselves. I wouldn't personally put the whole URL right beside of it. Like others have mentioned, maybe linking your GitHub at the top might be a smarter choice, and maybe hyperlinking it within the project section would be good. But just usually, if you want to hyperlink your project itself within the project section, then you can just hyperlink the name itself, and it would be easy to click on, and it would be accessible there, as well as within the header itself. When you mention your GitHub, it would probably be visible there.
Yeah, I totally agree with what the other panelists have said. Adding on to sort of what Ishita has been talking about regarding like proving that you have impact, and what kind of impact are you making. For the Advanced Tech Co professional experience, like your first bullet point is improve the employee training experience, training system website, maintain databases. I feel like improving is kind of a vague word. So like, how did you improve it? Like, how can you prove that you improved it? Like, what kind of statistics show that you improved it? What did you do to improve it? So that kind of thing. Just again, showing like what kind of impact you really had. And then this is more of a small thing, but like for some of the bullet points, like the capitalization, this is like very small, but like the capitalization seems a bit off. For example, like projects, it has designed and developed a recycling application, but like developed also has a capital D, which just stood out to me. So yeah. But other than that, like pretty much the same as the other panelists.
Yep, and yeah, I'll just add on a few little things. So I have a slightly different opinion in terms of the bolding. I don't think that's what's making it hard to read, but rather just the lack of white space. So the margins that you have in this resume are very small. So like if you wanted to print this, for example, you might have some like text or some graphics cut off. So that's going to be a problem, but just increasing the margins all around this resume would make it a lot easier to read. And then just, I guess, like, yeah, more impact statements, as everyone else mentioned already. And then just bold like any mention of like languages that you've used, so just people can relate it, is what I would say. And as someone already mentioned, like when you say improve the employee training system website and maintaining databases, just give some details there so people can say, oh, you have experience with this database technology, and makes it really clear for them to understand it. And if you have to reduce the number of points you have for some of these things, do that and just include more detail, because detail goes a long way of in helping recruiters understand. But yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you so much, panelists. We'll move on to the next resume. Do you guys have any thoughts?
Sorry, yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh no, you guys can go ahead.
Feel free, anyone else to jump in first too.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I noticed, one of the first thing I noticed was like the highlighted qualifications, again, as we mentioned, like for some of the previous ones, is pretty long. I'm not sure like if you have other things, because some of the relevant experience in all those, they have only one bullet point under them. So it's sort of hard to get a sense of what you did for each of the experiences. If you're looking for like extra space in order to better elaborate on those experiences, it might help them to cut down the highlighted qualifications. Because those are more high level and it would be helpful to get more insight as into your impact and that kind of thing for the different experiences you have below. Adding on to like going more in depth into the relevant experiences, I'd say like, for example, the World of Welcome, sort of maybe explaining like what exactly is World of Welcome Day, how many people attended, and how do you measure like the success of that event. One thing I really like is like the accomplished X through Y is measured by Z. So sort of giving the recruiter, whoever's looking at your resume, like a full idea of what you did for each sort of position, each experience, and again showing the impact. And then like also for, let's say, the first experience you had, so the youth advisory board member for the Canadian Cancer Society. You wrote that giving consultations for the upcoming community project Better Women. And it might be more helpful to show what kind of skills that giving consultations gives you. So maybe saying like displayed excellent communication and problem solving skills through giving consultations for like X number of companies or X number of businesses or whatever for the community project Better Women, because that just gives a better sense of what skills you've gained through that, as well as the impact you've made through it. Yeah. Oh, and then one last thing on my end. I feel like for the top part, so like where you put your name, that is pretty close to like the top of the page. So let's say if someone prints it out, your name might get cut off, which is not ideal. So I'd probably make the name bigger and make the margins more equal on all sides. So like having maybe less space at the bottom in order to make room for space at the top.
Yep, agreed with all of what Callan just said. Margins can be sort of reworked and made a little bit more equal so that when they print it out, it doesn't just cut your name off. And you can always try and reduce the margins a little bit to the side. You don't need to all the way, because when they print it out again, you need to make sure that you leave them enough space to not have anything cut off. But yeah, just making sure your name doesn't get cut off, because that would be one of the more important pieces of information about you that you don't want to miss out on. And then I will also add that you could potentially move some of the highlights of qualifications out of the resume itself, and instead elaborate a little bit more on the extracurriculars or the awards and certifications that you have. So you've mentioned that you were involved with the badminton club a few years back and you came second place overall. Now you can go into a little bit more depth about whether or not it is sort of from a national level, on a regional level, how big was this competition, how many participants were there, and how many participants did you place second out of. All of that impact, if it's meaningful enough, then definitely mention it. And if you think that there is not a lot of relevant experience around that, then I would say just getting rid of it, since it is a 4-year time period since the event itself has happened. So both of your honor roll and your badminton club involvements, if there's something really, really good to mention about them, keep them on, but by all means, otherwise, feel free to take them off. But then again, as extracurriculars, you've mentioned a few really, really good points, like you were on the robotics team and you've done some STEM-based YouTube channel videos, and you were also on the yearbook committee in your high school. So always elaborating on that just showing people how teamwork and leadership played into all of those roles is going to be useful. And again, you can get space for that by moving away some of your highlights of qualifications if you need to. And then one last thing I will add is, yeah, just going into a little bit more depth about your relevant experience. So like Kylan mentioned, I really like that format. Achieved X by doing Y, which made an impact Z. Really using numbers and trying to bold them wherever necessary to really draw that eye towards the specific highlights that you want to keep in mind. I also, last point, did notice that you don't necessarily have a skills section in your resume. So if you are looking to apply for a tech job or a software job, you do probably need to elaborate a little bit more on the technical skills that you have. So if there's a specific software you know how to use, and if there is a specific programming language that you're proficient with, then mentioning that. Obviously, you may be in your first year or second year, and so you might not have a lot of exposure to technical coursework and technical programming languages just yet, but still showing that initiative that maybe I participated in a hackathon and I picked up language XYZ through just being in a group of 2 people, or maybe I did a weekend project and I learned something new. Mentioning those software and those technical skills that you might even be slightly familiar with would put you at an advantage.
So adding on this, I agree with the previous panelist, but adding on to this is like you need to more add the precise course that you're enrolled in the education part. Like if you're in Bachelor's of Engineering, which kind of program that you were enrolled in, even like which kind of engineering you are doing. So that can be added in your education part. Apart from that, the last point that I want to point is the dates that you have mentioned in the awards and certification and extra co-curricular activities that can be kept a little bit on the right side of your resume, just to point out that these are the dates, so that the hiring manager or the recruiter can directly point out, okay, this is the co-curricular activity and this is the date, because that's what the layout has followed. So yeah, there's a lot more to work on the layout of this resume, but yeah, just 2 points to add on what the panelists have mentioned already.
Last thing, I will jump in really quickly. I just saw this and it caught my eye because it looked a little off, but you mentioned your dates and you've tried aligning them to the right, but I would say try and use a right alignment tab so they all sort of flush together uniformly, because they're a little uneven with how they sort of line up on the right side. So just trying to make sure that they all have sort of that same alignment that you see on the left side, like everything is on the same sort of, I guess, margin. Making sure that everything aligns also on the right side equally, so that your dates aren't all sort of, in unevenly spaced.
I guess I can add on a little bit to everyone's points. So I guess one thing I would say, like when you do a quick scan of this resume, it's kind of hard to see how each of the sections are separated because the fonts are like barely different in size. So I would say like maybe use a template that already exists online for resumes, because they make it very easy to separate each of the sections, and that's already done. Or you could just try to just increase the font a little bit for all of the titles that you have there, and it's going to make it easier to read. And I guess just like add more points to your experience, as everyone else was saying. Just 1 point is usually not enough, so maybe one more, like similar length, and you should be good for that. More impact points, and I guess yeah, just extracurricular, have some details with that. And lastly, I would say like add a LinkedIn link, because everyone uses that, and new recruiters like to look at what type of things you're getting involved with. So yeah, just make sure to do that. But that's it for me.
I can add a few points. I feel like at this point they'll be pretty nitpicky, but I'm okay to play that role. So I think your top point being excellent technical skills using Word, Excel, PowerPoint. I think if you're applying for a tech role, competency in those skills will be assumed. So I don't think you necessarily need to start with that. You can start with something else that helps you stand out. I'd also say on the spectrum of things, the resume with the bubbles, I'd probably call a bit over formatted with too much structure. I would say this is a little under formatted. So it makes it a little hard to find the main sections, as was already mentioned. So just think a little more about how you could improve or change the formatting a bit to increase the readability. I'll also say that a lot of your relevant experience, I think they could actually be lumped into one point under like community projects and talking about how you are involved in community projects. And I think that shows a positive side of your character and how you like to be involved, and something about taking initiative, being a self-starter. So I think those are all important points. I think separate points, it's kind of hard to see the link, but there's an opportunity to bring it all together to tell a cohesive story of how you get involved in these community projects. Was kind of already mentioned, but I'll reword it slightly differently. I would actually flip your extracurriculars and your relevant experience. If you're applying for a tech role, I think you should definitely give robotics team builder and YouTube channel content creator more space in your resume, and talk about like what are the pieces of technology you're working with, languages, what are the things that you've accomplished through that. I think that'd be really good. I think there was one more point that came to mind, but it is now escaping me. So those were the main ones.
Thank you to all the panelists. Now it's time for our fifth and final resume.
I can start us off if that's okay. So right off the bat, I think this is slightly better in terms of the formatting from the previous resume. I do like the fact that they've distinguished all of the sections, and it's easier to see, those experiences stand out on their own, because the only parts that are really bolded are the titles themselves. But again, keeping in mind that you want to also bold some of the sections within the resume that sort of talk about the specific experience or the specific skill that you bring to the team and the impact as well. So just obviously starting off of that would be nice. I do see that they've linked their email and their GitHub, but again, putting your LinkedIn down if you have one, because it looks like you have a lot of really good experience over there. So having a LinkedIn and like showcasing all of that on your profile in case recruiters want to read a little bit more about you through that sort of profile would also be ideal. And it would be a good idea to like showcase your skills and give them an incentive to like hang on to your project profile a little bit longer. If they see a lot of really good experience, they're inclined to click on your LinkedIn and check you out and your profile over there, and they spend a lot more time on your resume as a result. The other thing I will sort of quickly point out is your education experience. Again, I think chronologically, your Harvard edX experience is more relevant and more recent than your secondary school experience, since it was in 2021. So I'd put that a little bit above, and maybe even get rid of your secondary school experience. You don't necessarily always need it unless there's something that really you wanted to showcase, like a scholarship that you won or stuff like that. I do see you've mentioned an Ontario Scholar and an honor roll recipient, but if there's something distinguished about that, then maybe you can list that on. Otherwise, you can just get rid of the secondary school section entirely, I would say. And then the other thing I would say is, in your experiences, I think you've listed the title of, I guess, the club or the company or whatever it is. So I see that you've mentioned McMaster Medical Engineering Team, you've mentioned Solar Car, but you've then also listed your electrical team member, your design team member, and your program member, all of that within the same line. I would split that onto a separate line. It's just, I guess, preference, but it kind of makes it easy to miss what your role on the team was. So I see that for the co-founder web developer lead, you've mentioned that right under the medical engineering design team. That was a good choice. And then I would do the same thing for the solar car electrical team one as well, and just say electrical team member instead of putting the electrical team member right beside the solar car. And then I do really like the fact that skills that you use are mentioned below each project. So it really helps put into perspective where you used what you used. But then final thing, again, making sure that you show something in your, I guess, bullet points that has an impact or like shows a difference. Like what can you do that no one else can? And either like starting your sentences off with an action verb and better highlighting the impact you brought to the team. Because if it doesn't show an impact, it's probably not worth mentioning on your resume. So you really want to emphasize on the fact that your work has made an impact and your work is able to achieve something that the team wasn't able to do otherwise.
So I will go next. I guess looking at this resume, I kind of remembered the last point that I had for the other resume. In terms of generally formatting, number of points for a certain experience, I think one is okay, potentially too little. Like if an experience only has one bullet point, it potentially indicates that maybe not enough was done or achieved to be able to talk about. So then it puts into question whether or not it should be on the resume. But so that's on the lower end of the spectrum if it's less bullet points. If it's like 4 or 5, I think it becomes too many. Like you can assume probably people will try to read the first 1 or 2. If they're really interested, go to the third. But beyond that, like they'll be really like just skimming it. And most of the content of it probably won't be captured. Like in Waterloo Catalyst Summer Leadership Program, the 4th point, like if I were reading it, it's kind of too long for me to read the whole thing as the 4th bullet. I'll see 2nd overall, but it won't really stand out on its own. And I think that's a general theme of number of projects and experiences that are included in like in general. Like if they go too far back and if there are too many experiences and projects, like people will read the first few and assume you've put the most relevant ones up top, but will not get to the later ones. So I think with the smaller font and trying to pack in more information in 2 columns, like there's a bit of a story of like less is more. Like you want to put the most impactful and important content on the resume and make sure they get read. Yeah, it's easy to get lost with many points being included. And then about like the 2 columns in general, it's kind of sometimes confusing to know how to read a resume like this. In North America, we would typically read left to right, top to bottom. So we might read education, projects, then experience. If that's the way you want it to get read, that's okay. But just know that it might flow a little better if you cut down the number of projects and experiences and then just have it top to bottom. It just might be easier to actually point to the key information that you want to highlight. I'll pass it off there.
I guess I can add on a little bit. So I guess one of the major concerns with the 2 column is just ATS readability, as previously mentioned, for different resumes. So make sure this is readable by ATS with the tool that was sent already. And then I guess bolding the language or other points of interest in your resume would also be make it a little bit easier to like see specific skills that you would want to be seen, like Python, HTML, and SQL in your projects. You can mention that, and also you can mention like what year all these projects were made, just so they can know how recent it was, and then how much detail you can go in it in your interview if you get selected for that. And I guess in terms of your experience, it's kind of weird, like in terms of the structure. So the first experience is just you mentioned the team that you were part of and your role. So I would say just kind of do that consistently with all of your other experiences. So don't just like forego like one of the points, like the web developer lead, and then not put that in the second point. And yeah, I guess you can also try to reduce the white space a little bit in this, just because to make it look a little bit more even, if you would like to just add something like a hobby or something, and then maybe that can become like a point of conversation with the interviewer, because I've had that happen, and talking about a hobby in an interview really like sets the rapport and like really makes you a lot more likable to the interviewer. And yeah, just lastly, just add a LinkedIn link. That's kind of it.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone else has said so far. One thing I want to reiterate is like using action words and numbers for impact. So for example, under like the Med B web dev position, it says currently working on implementing design with React.js. I feel like you might not need to say currently working on because implementing sort of implies that you're currently implementing it. And then like as Bilal mentioned, like highlighting React.js, because otherwise like you might not see it if you're just skimming through. And then as well for like outreach website, like how many people are going to the website, that kind of thing, just so that they have more of a statistic as to how active this website is and that kind of thing. But that's it for me.
So everybody just covered every most prominent part of this, but what I want to add is, as already mentioned by Bilal, that the date should be mentioned in the project part, but try to add those years and date to the right side of that part so that it can be clearly, observed by the recruiter. And yeah, the technical skills should be added differently. Yeah, though they have mentioned in the project part, but to mention in different part like technical skills will give an idea of how many skills do you have, but prominently going through the project, that won't mention clearly the recruiter that how many things you have worked already on. So getting a new technical part skills will help the recruiter. That's from my side.
Thank you so much to, sorry, did anyone want to add anything there?
I was gonna add one more thing real quick. For a resume where you have a lot of dates, not having the recruiter do math is sometimes helpful. So you can put in brackets like the length of the term for a certain experience. Yeah, that was it.
Thank you for that piece of advice. So that concludes our resume roast. Thanks so much to all the panelists and to the audience for attending. Stay tuned for our winter interview event, and please fill out the feedback form if you can. You'll receive an email in about 20 minutes with it. And stay tuned for other events from GDSC McMasterU. Thank you.
Cool. Nice meeting everyone. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you have any questions. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.